We are back at the Non-Obvious Virtual Summit on Book Marketing, and I have with me right now Lee Constantine, the founder of Publishizer, which is a crowdsourcing platform for getting your book in front of lots of different kinds of publishers. And first of all, welcome, Lee. I know you're across the world, having your quarantine in a fantastic place, right?
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here. I came over here just before the pandemic to Bali actually, and I'm stuck here until September. But it's not a bad place to ride out the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm not sure that being stuck in Bali is kind of the right terminology to use for that place, but that was a smart move. So you have a lens on publishing that I think is kind of unique, and I thought the place where we could start was just by giving a little bit of background on the different ways that an author can get a book published, just for people who may not be familiar with all of the different models. I mean, there's a traditional model, there's a hybrid model, there's self-publishing. So can you just kind of give us an overview of what the different methods are for publishing? Because I think that might be useful for some people.
I'll do my best. So the way that we look at it, or the way that I look at it essentially, is you have non-traditional and then you have traditional. And under those are like basically the categories. And then, traditionally you have major imprints from publishing houses. You have other independent publishers who offer traditional contracts, usually no upfront cost. Maybe there's some paid advances involved, but they have some distribution. And then on the non-traditional side, you have hybrid publishers. You maybe have some small presses. There's some small presses that are also have some traditional distribution. You have service publishers or independent publishers who have no upfront cost that basically handle the logistics of your book. So there's a broad range of these types of publishers, and they fit different types of authors based on where they are in terms of the book progress or their career as an author or their career as their business if they're writing a nonfiction. And they're really good to match up with you at whatever level that matches the author.
Yeah, and you've seen a lot of different projects come through from authors who have a wide range of expectations. I know that your platform is one that allows authors to essentially put their book idea or proposal, or in some cases their finished book, up on the platform in order to generate pre-sales, which then drives interest from publishers in acquiring their project. So I thought it was interesting to look at, just from your perspective, what has made a successful book in terms of the author being able to drive a lot of pre-sales, get a publisher interested. Are there some themes that you've seen in the projects that have come through the Publishizer platform that might be useful for people to hear?
Yes. So I think this is a good second question after the types of publishers, because like I said, there's so many publishers out there and so many authors that a lot of publishers are very selective, and there's a lot of publishers that aren't necessarily selective, but they're very good fits for the different types of authors, depending on where your book is, what your goals are for it. So in general, being successful with the book project, at least from the work that we've done at Publishizer with so many authors, is one, you have to be committed to the book. So this has to be, it has to be the right time for you to, one, this is, writing the book, pushing out the book to, whether you're doing pre-orders on Publishizer or whether you're going to push this out in a release with the publisher, it just has to be the right time for you to commit to this project wholeheartedly and to drive some sales and reach out to people and really get this idea out there. So commitment is probably the number one factor. Other than that, other publishers have different criteria that they want in order to work with you. So some, they have an upfront cost, or if you're going to self-publish, there's a pretty big cost that may come with that before you could bring this out into retail. Or there's other publishers that don't necessarily have a cost, but they have distribution, but they require strict criteria in proposals and from your background. So it is a broad range of things. I would say the biggest, beyond the commitment to the project, is, I guess, building your audience or building your brand or your message around what this book is, because it's going to make selling the book and people connecting with the book easier when you've been saying the same thing over and over and over again, and a book is just one culmination of that message.
So when you say building an audience and having an audience, I mean, do you mean people having like some sort of podcast or blog or things like that?
It definitely helps. Anything that you can add add to share your message. So podcasting is a great way to meet with people, build an audience, building an email list. Email is the best way to sell books. Whereas if you're building a following on social media, whether you have connections on LinkedIn or you have 10,000 followers on Instagram or Facebook, really great thing. Those are really the indicator that you are putting yourself out there, and there's a lot of people at least interested in what you have to say. The best way to actually gain traction with an idea is through email. And podcasts, of course, people are going to subscribe to get your next podcast, or a newsletter is another really great way to build an audience, because people come to expect your content. You have direct contact with them. You can send them an email whenever you want. Whereas if you're building a following on social media, it's a bit more indirect, and people aren't actually going there for a purpose per se. So there are some channels better than others. And yeah, podcasting is super trendy if you find a way to stand out.
And one of the things you said before that I just wanted to dig into was when publishers are looking at potential projects, there's a set of criteria that they're looking at, and I just wonder if we can maybe dig into that in terms of like what that criteria is. I mean, you've mentioned before, have an audience, have some group of people who want to hear your message. Obviously, it's a crowdfunding platform, so your ability to actually pre-sell the book, where people put in their credit card, they actually pre-buy the book, is one criteria, and it's an important one in the platform. What else does a publisher look at in your experience? What else do publishers care about when they're evaluating these projects?
I mean, they look at the two main things that I think anyone should look at when they decide to work with an author and do business with anyone. It's, what is the project? Is this a high quality idea? Is it relevant to people? And, what is your background? Do you have the audience? Audience is always a key factor, but do you have the background or the credibility or the credentials to write a book and bring this to market? Because when you bring this out to readers, they're not only going to look at, is this topic super relevant, and is this something I'm interested in? Who is writing the book is also very relevant. They're going to look at who's writing this and what is their background, and that's going to add to their buying decision. So when we share our books, or when our authors share our books with the publisher, they're always looking at things like, is there a clear problem? If it's a nonfiction, if there's a clear problem in the market or the industry, what solution does your book provide, or what solution does your book approach? What is the unique message of it beyond obviously selling a lot of copies or raising some funds to publish? It is really about, have you thought about this idea, and is it well defined where you have an audience to push this out to?
Do you think that most people do judge a book by its cover in terms of whether they're interested in even looking at it?
I think they should. One, they do, and they should more now than ever. And I say that because podcasting, blogging, a book is one channel. You have a podcast, you have a blog, you have a social following. These are different ways or mediums for you to get your book out there. And you have to stand out in some way, whether it's the messaging you're putting out there or it's the design of your book. Because if you go on Amazon and you look at 100 books that are self-published, it's very likely that none of them are published by a professional designer. And it speaks to the commitment of the creator. It speaks to maybe the quality inside the book. So when you do look at a book in Barnes & Noble or on a retail shelf, or maybe a book that's been pushed out by a small press or a publisher, they put a team behind this and they've thought about it, and it just shows that they care about the project. They know what people are going to pick up. So I do think that people do judge a book by its cover, but rightly so, because that's only how you choose and you make a decision of what to pay attention to.
And do you, when you have a project that comes through the platform that does find a home and moves toward publication, do you track those projects? Do you look at them? Do you kind of see like how they do afterwards? Or is it kind of like once they've made it through, they've kind of graduated and it's sort of like, okay, we were part of this phase of their project and now they've gone out into the world and good luck to them?
We try as much as possible. If they're self-publishing and they're doing it on Amazon, really easy way to track sales through like a book scan or something, or they know how many sales that come through. That's usually the key indicator of what's happening after Publishizer. How is this book selling in the market? A lot of this stuff is kind of preserved by the publishers, but there are numbers that we do track and see how our author is doing. Typically, a lot of our authors want to hit a bestseller, whether that's an Amazon bestseller in a certain category, or those are the trackable things. But there's other things that authors write a book for or want to get a publisher for. Maybe they want to just share their message in a story, and that's one intangible that's very hard to track. Or maybe they want to bring some money or awareness back to the business. Or maybe they want to push out a book because they've been doing speaking and they want to increase their speaking fee. So these are things that may take a long time to develop and track. So we track as much as possible and keep in touch with our authors. But there's so many intangibles that sometimes it's just it's impossible.
Yeah, no, I could imagine. I can imagine. I wonder if you could just talk about when you see these projects come through the platform. It's quite a unique idea in terms of how you are serving a need in the marketplace of helping publishers to discover new projects and new authors, and helping authors to connect with those publishers. Was this based on you having some sort of a personal experience? I mean, I'm just curious, like, how did you have the concept to start the platform in the first place? Like, take us back to the beginning of that.
This was over 5 years ago when this whole thing was started, a little bit before that, and very much a startup. And what it is today and what it's evolved into is definitely not what it's. We're basically just finding, what do authors want? What's the problem in book publishing? A huge traditional industry, really hard to solve a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are really good to add on to this industry, but we're just kind of trying to solve a pain point. And it started out as a way for authors to crowdfund their own paid advance, because paid advances were becoming more and more rare. They're still very difficult to get, and publishers are very selective. We used to say 96% of book proposals get rejected, and they still do. It's probably higher than 96%. So we'd say crowdfund your book idea. Don't spend months, writing a book and then pitching it. Crowdfund the idea, sell pre-orders, crowdfund your advance, validate the idea, and then you can go write the book once you know that people are already going to buy it without anything coming out of your pocket. That's really where it started from, and we got quite a bit of traction on that. It kind of grew from there. One thing authors always came back to us is they wanted distribution, they wanted the credibility, they wanted to use their book for their business or to increase speaking fees, and usually publishers were a additional way to make that happen. So this was still something that they wanted. So we started developing relationships with publishers, non-traditional, traditional publishers, imprints, small presses, independents. And then after they would crowdfund their book, we would connect them with these publishers who would then offer a book deal. So it really evolved into what it is today. We were basically just trying to find a product market fit back in the day to see how we could help authors. And today we're just trying to serve authors in every way we know how.
Yeah, and I've seen that. I mean, certainly on the publishing side. I mean, we've been in contact for a couple of years now, I think, and we've looked at a bunch of projects through the platform. And I know that you've got some great examples of books that have done really well. I mean, can you give us just a sense of the scale of the operation in terms of, like, sometimes you hear people say, well, everybody has a book inside of them, and I don't know if that's true. I think everyone might think they do. I think that anyone who sits down and actually does it deserves a lot of credit, even if they don't end up selling that many books, because it's a hard thing to do, to sit down and do that. When you look at the scale of the operation, can you just give us a sense of, like, the growth of it, how many projects you've seen come through, and then, like, what tends to get funded, and maybe give us kind of an example or two of a project that made it through that progress that you're proud of?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So we've worked with a lot of authors. We've tried a really broad set of authors, because again, when we first started, we didn't know which type of author, which type of book this process would work best with. It works really well for nonfiction, self-help, business, mind and body, because typically the authors are coaches or they're speakers, or again, they're building an audience, or they have this message already, and a book just fits really nicely into that. So that, of course, is, where we've seen a lot of success. And not only that, publishers that we're working with typically like to acquire these types of books because there's a clear problem in the market, at least if you write a very good proposal and your book is well defined and you have a clear target audience. The publisher knows that, okay, you've done your homework, you know what's out there in the industry, you know how your book is going to tie into it. That is a really successful approach to take. Whereas on the other side, if you're a fiction author, we have had a lot of fiction authors on the platform as well. It's a bit tougher because it's not solely based on the proposal, on the problem and a solution or your background. It's based on the quality of the manuscript or of the story. So you need to write the manuscript before we pitch it out there. And usually fiction authors are just really good at writing. They may not have a coaching practice or not pushing out a message consistently. So it is a bit more difficult for them to gain some traction on the platform. Although there have been a lot of good authors. Stu Krieger was one of our first fiction authors. He was a screenwriter for The Land Before Time, the animated dinosaur film. He had his first book that he's been working on for 7 years, and he was one of our first fiction. He did really well. He sold 300 copies in, I think, 10 days, and a traditional publisher came by and picked him up. That was a really good validation for us on the fiction side that this would work. On the nonfiction, it's happened so many times. Most memorable, Ajit Nawaka, he's the co-founder of Mind Valley and of EverCoach. I've been following him for a long time in his newsletter. And one day I replied to him and said, hey, this would be really great content for a book. He goes, I've been thinking about a book for a long time. Let's talk about a proposal. So he wrote a proposal. He crowdfunded his book. He had these really interesting packages where he would offer 3-month coaching or 6-month coaching for 50 copies or 100 copies, really gained traction quickly. And that allowed him to get picked up by a really nice, fast-growing independent publisher that has a couple of New York Times bestsellers behind them. So those are 2 really good stories. But it all came down to, was it the right time? How good was the proposal? How good was that manuscript? And did we have a publisher for them? So there's a lot of variables that come into play. I hope that begins to answer your question.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that this has been a really interesting perspective just across what makes a successful project. How do you position it? How do you drive that initial audience? And how do you actually get them to commit to pre-sales? And so this has been a great kind of foundation for some of the basics around the different ways to get a book published. And I really appreciate you taking some time to share that, to share the story of Publishizer. And if you are watching this and you're an aspiring author, I say it's definitely a platform to check out because it might lead you to how to get your book out there into the world. So thank you, Lee. Thanks for the time. Enjoy your time in Bali, and I appreciate you. I appreciate this.
Yeah, Rohit, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this video from the Non-Obvious Virtual Summit on book marketing. If you'd like to see more videos like this, check out nonobvious.com/book marketing. And if you want to get a weekly look at the most interesting stories of the week, check out my weekly insights show called Non-Obvious Insights right here on this channel, where I talk about the most fascinating stories that you might have missed.